Well, welcome to week 2 of the Minors. Today we are talking about Joel, and Steve Pruett gave the message, so Steve joins me as well as Mark, his son. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here.
The Minor Pruett. So, Mark, people probably have seen you now. They probably, if they've been around Element, they've seen you on stage leading.
Oh, yeah, I play a little piano. Yeah.
What is your favorite instrument to play?
You know, my guilty pleasure is playing guitar. I'm not good at it, but man, I love doing it. It feels the best.
Nice.
But I do express myself a lot better through a piano.
Is that what you started on?
It is what I started on, yeah.
So how and when did that start?
8?
Probably, yeah. Probably.
I started taking lessons when I was really young, and I kind of resented it for the most part until I was about 15 or so, and I started really getting into bands. Funny story that when I was 12, probably, Aaron Carlberg and Marianne came over to our house for dinner. And I remember Aaron picking up Dad's guitar and playing Dave Matthews Band song on it or something like that. And I remember just being so impressed with Aaron's musicianship and his talent playing guitar. And he kind of goaded me on to jam with him. And I couldn't. All I'd ever done was read music. And he was like, you gotta learn to play chords. You gotta learn to play chords so you can be in the band. And I was thinking like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Like, yeah, I don't want to do this dumb classical music. I want to play in a band. And I remember they left, and Mom and Dad were like, "Hey, we think it's really good what you're doing. Don't take that personally." I'm like, "No, I agree with them wholeheartedly. That's what I want to do."
So, did you put all your boys in music, or did you see something?
Only Mark. We saw something in him. He was always beaten on something, just had something. And I mean, here's the parental side of the story is that, when he was little, we made him take lessons and made him practice, which he hated to do like crazy. And then when he got to, I think it was junior high, he said, I'm not going to do piano anymore. And we said, well, we had this little chat. We said, we're actually in charge of your education, and we see a gifting in you, and we think that music needs to be part of your education, and so we're going to keep doing it. And we changed his teacher, and he got a teacher who gave him things that were way above his skill level and challenged him, even Scott Joplin type of stuff, that he really wanted to quit. But at that time, he began to really take it as his own.
Well, with that, you want to jump into Joel? Would you mind giving a brief recap?
We're talking this week about the book of Joel. He's one of the minor prophets. It's prophetic poetry, almost a whole book. If you have a new Bible, you can actually see the way that it's laid out. It looks like a poem, and that's because it is. And God calls upon the people of Judah to rend their hearts and not their garments so that they can return to him. Then in the middle of the book, it shifts and goes to a future day of the Lord where some pretty phenomenal things are going to happen. Like he's about the first one that really mentions a definite coming of the Holy Spirit. And then he goes in to tell them about the devastation that's going to happen during that eventual day of the Lord. But then again, he shows what happens when his people turn to him in the end. And he promises to be with them and to protect them all the way through, and eventually to dwell with them forever.
Have you taught through Joel before?
No.
No? So is it fun? Like, is it new material, so to speak, to work through?
Yeah, it's been great. I had no idea that there was as much as there is in the book.
So I think a common theme that I think we're going to see throughout all of these minors is this idea of worship. I know next week we hit it a lot. how do you guys define worship? And Mark, thanks for being here as kind of our newest person who leads music on Sundays. But I'm curious how both of you explain worship to somebody, and what is your heart when it comes to either corporate worship or just worship in your life?
I always almost always think of the word worth when I think of worship, because it came from worthship. That's how it was originally said even. And it really, to me, is anything that you do or say that shows the worth of your God. When it comes to corporate worship, I love it where the congregation is declaring the praises, the value, the power, the worth of our God together.
One of the most powerful feelings that I feel like I've ever had in my life is hearing the congregation all singing together. And I just feel like it's this just brief little glimpse of heaven. It's this brief little glimpse of eternity.
Yeah.
It's all of us just with all of our voices lifted up and unified. It's so precious, and it's so... Words come to mind that I would never want to use in a normal sentence, like majestic, but there's something, there's something supernatural about it. We're created to worship God. We're created to praise Him. And so I think for me, as a person who's trying to figure out how to be a worship leader, that's kind of what I feel like I'm chasing down, is trying to figure out how to foster that. I have all these ideas of the worth of it. You know, it's going to be worth it if the music is great. And so often I'm finding that it doesn't matter at all. Music can be complete garbage. It has nothing to do with that. Or maybe it does. I don't know. Also, if it's if it's discordant, then there is there's a feeling of unrest that seems to counteract a person's sort of like disposition to get into that place of...
Well, it distracts you away from the one that you're supposed to be focusing on. So that's why we want to do it with excellence, not to be a good performance and have everybody go, yay, the band is so good, but to facilitate worship without getting in the way. My prayer Sunday mornings is always, God, don't let me get in the way. Like I have a really hard time with myself getting in the way. I fight it. I have spent too many years trying to, improve my musicianship. That kind of letting that take a back seat and putting my heart where it belongs is hard.
I think all this goes into, dovetail into, part of the what you talked about in the message, this rending of garments. And so how does that, what was that culturally in that time and today, and how does worship play?
In the Old Testament, rending the garment was a sign. There were two main ways that people showed their either exasperation, desperation, or anger, or, just that they are beside themselves, as they would tear their garment and everybody could see they were in distress, or they would grab ashes and flip them on their head. And so if you are in either of those ways, people would know that you were really seriously affected by something. And what God says there is like, I want you not to rend your garment. I want you to rend your heart. I want it at the very core of your being. I want you to be changed. And then let's talk about it. Return to me by starting right there at your very core. So the same thing with worship. The outward, there's the outward either technical parts of it or display parts of it. Some people just don't even think they're worshiping unless they're raising their hands and all that. And that's a wonderful thing if it starts in the heart. And here in Joel, God is saying, you know what? All that stuff is fluff to me. Mm-hmm. I want your heart to be rent. I want to see that. There's two different ways that your heart is rent. One is by your guilt, where you have this aha moment that you realize, I really blew it, and it's like your world collapses because you realize that you have failed and you can't get yourself out of something. The other one could be where, because of a circumstance that has happened, a devastation like the plague or something like that, that you are at your wit's end, at the end of your rope, and you just go, God, I've got nothing here. Help me. If you don't intervene here, I don't know what's going to happen to you. I'm going to implode on myself because I'm desperate for you to intervene, something like that. There may be others too, but I see,
It's probably about, 4 or 5 years ago, and I was coming home to my house, and I was praying. I was going through something really hard at the time, and I felt like I had, there was a feeling of worship that I used to have. There was a place that my heart would go that was so majestic, and I just couldn't feel it anymore. I literally fell on my knees in my front yard, and I looked up at the sky melodramatically. I'm just like, God, let me feel something again. I just got so focused on the world, I think, on my personal life, on my artistic life, on my whatever facets of myself and of the world itself. So fixated on it that it was like I couldn't even feel the presence of God anymore. I couldn't even, the connection just felt severed. And it has taken me a long time. I feel like only in the last few months have I finally started feeling like I'm getting to the other end of that. Like that, it wasn't God snaps his fingers and then I feel like this connection is repaired.
And do you think that was your doing or God's doing?
100% God's.
Okay. Just curious.
I think I had to make some choices that kept me in the right place. But I think those are minor in comparison to the things that God was doing. I mean, I can look back now and just see this crystal clear hand of God in my life, just putting things in place and just this overwhelming provision for me in my life. And now I look at that and I can't not, fall on my knees and thank God. It's incredible. And
I love what you said, that overwhelming provision, and that takes me back to the book of Joel, where everything was eaten and destroyed, but it all came back more so. It takes me back to our Lent series with Job, he had more than he had before, and it's not about having more, but God's overwhelming provision, like you said, is just, we can't comprehend it. We can't comprehend how good he is and how he wants our hearts so that he can, I think, bless us more in the end, because the ultimate blessing is eternity with him, right? And salvation and being able to worship him forever. And that alone, I think, is so much more beautiful than we often think it is.
Yeah. Well, I think, in the case of Job and in our case, that when we go through a dark time, whether it's losing stuff or sickness or whatever, when we come out of it and we see God blessing us, it is like a 20/20 vision. All of a sudden you really realize it, where if you were just to cruise through and he's just meeting your needs and all of that, you don't really have a need to look up. You don't really have a need to look any further as to why it's happening sometimes. So I wonder if Job, being doubly blessed at the end was like a quadruple blessing for him, because he knew for a fact that it was God who had replaced everything,
I'm really amazed by the just the sheer power that God has. Just the he's unstoppable. These we sing these songs that
I
say
love
that. But he really is omnipotent. He really is not stoppable, and these things that seem so so bleak, so just devastating. God's in complete control, and I don't think I could have ever felt it so viscerally without seeing it with my own eyes, seeing it in my own life.
Yeah, I think that's almost like reading a biography and just going, wow, that's really something, but not really sinking in. It's sort of a vicarious knowledge that you have, and it helps because that whatever you read or saw or whatever, God brings back to you to remind you that, he's not just there for that person, he's there for you too. And it seems like that's a little harder for us to get that communication from him. Not that he's silent on it, but that we're sometimes hesitant to believe that he's as faithful to us as he is to some people that we think maybe deserve it more.
Totally. Yeah, deserve it more for sure. I mean, I have the worst case of imposter syndrome, I feel like, in the world, that I feel like
it's genetic,
I don't,
Mark. Well, I don't know how many times I've felt that very same way, that I'm just not maybe worth as much as somebody else, or I have blown it, or I'm not qualified, all those kinds of things. And after a while, I began to realize that when there's an attack on your worthiness, that's usually not coming from God. He already knows the exact level of our worth, and yet he placed a price on us by giving us his son. He's already declared that to him, you're worth his own son.
Yeah.
And when we're accused of, being an imposter, or you'll never amount to anything, that I have a really hard time finding anywhere in the Bible where that kind of talk comes from God to his people. He just doesn't do it. And I think that's the enemy attacks us as a person, where God will come to you and say, Mark, you really blew it right there. Let's peel that thing off of your life. And he'll focus on the thing that's eating away at your integrity or your whatever, and not at you as his child, because he's already declared you righteous.
And it is amazing, because God's provision is overwhelming if we really stop and consider it. This week, really look at where your life you give lip service, and where God really is calling you to bring your heart to realize who you are in light of Christ. And I think that's so freeing, and find ways to worship him, to give him worth, to speak of his goodness and who he is and what he has done, and find ways to express it to him and to others, and invite others into celebrating just who God is, and be thankful for the locusts that enter our lives, because his provision is better than we can picture it being, and ultimately being in his presence forever is better than this moment in time, and he does somehow bring it all musically in together and uses it for his glory, which is a sweet thing for us to experience, and to let him be God and us not. So with that, we'll be back next week for Haggai. Haggai? How do you say it?
Haggai.
Haggai.
Not haggis. That's Wayne's World. And I think it's funny, you say like learning to be a worship leader, and almost as if that's like a bad thing. I think the best worship leader is one who's learning to worship, because people pick up on that. And that's probably why Paul told Timothy, don't let people look down on you because you're young, but be an example to them in life and love and faith and purity and all that. And then he says, let them see your progress. He didn't say, let them see how good you are, but let them see your progress. And sometimes when people know that you are learning too, it actually is, it's like a fresh passing on of something, and it's more, I don't know, I think it's just more winsome that way.